Hey guys, it's Hayes. Welcome back to my channel. You can already tell by the title of this video that this is a continuation of our Don't Try to Make It in Music segment. So, this was not the video I had intended to do next in this series, and I'm gonna give you a bit of a background as to why I'm doing this one. So I stumbled upon a lot of videos from certain creators and forums where this was being discussed, and I came across a lot of people mocking those that have been in the industry for a while and almost making fun of them, saying that they're whining and complaining about the streaming age and that they don't have a right to. You're allowed to have your own opinion, of course. My issue is when these channels and creators are operating under the guise that they're educational platforms. I do have a bit of a gripe with the fact that they are a bit disrespectful to people who helped pave the way for us. That'll be its own separate video on that specific subject. Not those creators, but just about the people who paved the way for us in this industry and why I think respect is such an important thing. But specifically, I wanted to dive into this video because they touched on these topics and they came off just very ignorant to me, where they don't understand why people that were in the industry well before most of us were in it or even alive, why they're upset with the changes. You have to take into account that most of the people who were in the industry before we even got involved had different revenue streams and a different business model before the age of streaming disrupted everything. So of course it's going to upset people, and of course there are going to be people having some difficulty transitioning to this new model. I just think it's important to keep that in mind as we move forward into these segments, and I want this whole thing to be informative for you. And yes, an absolute discussion, but I'm not really so comfortable with the discussions I've seen that are just very disrespectful to those who have made this possible. And I will at some point go into a video on the mentorships I had and how they really shaped me as a person, and I'm super grateful for them. I just want you to keep in mind, as you go forward in your careers, to not downplay the importance of those that came before us. Sorry that was super ranty and rambly. We will get into this video. It's going to be a long one. It's going to be multiple parts because of how much information I want to give to you. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Hey everyone, so this is a few days later. I'm editing this in, or really Beta's gonna edit this in, because we went over the footage and realized there were certain things I didn't mention that I should have. One, this ended up focusing primarily on negative aspects of streaming, so I'm going to have a part 2 that focuses on the positives. It would just have been way too long to put it all in this one video. In addition, I needed to add a disclaimer that some of this is speculation because there aren't a lot of studies specifically comparing physical sales to streaming. So I'm making the comparisons and jumping kind of to conclusions in some parts. It's nothing crazy. Any of the numbers I give you are still all fact, but I just wanted to let you know that when it seems I'm going a bit further into it and I didn't provide a specific source to how I came up with that idea, those are the parts where you had to speculate because there isn't enough research on those exact topics. With that being said, hope you enjoy part 1. Part 2 will be here shortly so that you get all the information close together. Before we get into streaming, it's important that we take a look at history and how we got here in the first place to have a better understanding and to make sure we're all at the same foundational level before we move forward. For decades, the music industry thrived on CD sales, vinyl sales, cassettes, physical copies of their music being sold. And many artists were able to make a living off that. In the year 2000, music revenue sales peaked around $21.5 billion. Prior to the age of streaming, many artists had record deals, so they made about 15% of those revenue sales off of their physical sales of music. And even though that percent seems crazy small, and we will at some point get into the whole record label dynamic and thoughts and facts on that, it still was enough for many artists to live on with how much they were selling of their physical music. On the downside, it did create a higher barrier to entry for many artists because you had to have a team around you in order to be making that kind of money and to be sustainable. But the ones who were able to do it did make a living. In around the year 2000, that's when we began to have our turning point. Napster, good old Napster, I'm sure most of you remember it, was created, which allowed people to download music for free on the internet. Illegally, of course. And this not only forced the music industry into the digital age that it could have gotten into prior, yet for some reason waited to do until it was shoved, it also created this dynamic between the artist and the audience, where audiences were now accustomed to being able to get the music they wanted, one, at the touch of their fingertips, two, for free. And even bigger than that, they were no longer forced into buying an entire album anymore. They were so accustomed to having to buy the entire album in order to hear maybe the 3 songs they wanted, and this was the first time that they started to shift away from that and getting just what they wanted out of their experience. In 2001, Napster was closed for obvious reasons of copyright infringement, and in 2002, iTunes Music filled that void. It now allowed you to purchase songs legally. You no longer had to buy the entire album still. You could get it at the touch of your fingertips, although downloading was a little slower then. Depending on the years we're looking at for iTunes Music, songs ranged between 69 cents to about $1.29. It's very important to note that because of Napster, because of iTunes Music, there was really no ability to go backwards. We had given the freedom to the consumer at this point. There was no reason they were going to go back and pay for an entire album, wait on it. I'm not saying people don't do that, but the majority of consumers were no longer going to wait for that, unless they were a diehard fan. 2016 was known as the year of streaming, and 2017, 2016, around there, was the beginning of a 3-year turnaround for the music industry. It had not been doing so hot prior to that. It was on a 13-year decline before 2016, 2017. So they're finally seeing things pick up. It took a while though. Streaming services around that time really began to decimate the music industry. They were able to cut costs that the rest of the music industry didn't have the luxury of doing. They didn't have to worry about packaging, printing, or shipping. Now we're in the age of streaming. You may have heard the number 75% of streaming taking up the music industry's revenue. That statistic, while accurate, is a little bit misleading. It makes up 75% of music revenue, which is a very key thing to remember, because the majority of money in the music industry is not made in streaming, despite what some people might want to say, and despite certain individuals thriving in the streaming world. You have people like Beyonce in around 2017 making 88% of her profits in the touring part of the industry. And yes, I've also heard people argue that she's an anomaly, but I'd like you all to remember the music industry is made up of anomalies. Those are the people that are the music industry. I get that there are tens of thousands of people who are in minute ways in the industry, but those who make a living full-time as musicians, whatever their tier, if they are a full-time musician, they are the anomaly and they are the industry as a whole. Just keep that in mind with the numbers I'm going to give you, because those are the ones I'm really going to focus on, even though I've seen other creators discount them. So you've probably heard some people mention that you need to blame labels for the low payouts that some artists are seeing rather than blaming Spotify. As I mentioned, we will at some point get into the whole dynamic of record labels, but I'm not, for this video, going to push that topic. And I don't really agree with demeaning them for certain cases, for agreements that were made between parties and negotiated. I will go further into that in another one, so don't fight me in the comments yet on it. I promise I'll have a whole thing on it. You have to go and blame the first person in this chain, because Spotify pays out between 0.006 and 0.0084 cents per stream. That's ridiculously low. And then you take into account that most, at least big labels, are going to take 70%-ish from their artists, if not more. The bigger names make a deal with Spotify where they agree to give Spotify 50+% of the royalties. So those break down even more. So it's really not just the label that's to blame, because those deals, the 15% that artists were getting from their sales and music, that's always been a standard. No one seems to remember that. So physical sales of music still had deals like that, and artists were able to make a living on it. And I will include a chart here that will show you how Spotify pays out artists, so you can get a better understanding as to how the math works and why what many artists make is so little. You'll hear big names complaining about what they're getting. One of the major ones was Taylor Swift. She was the first one to really be pissed off about streaming services, and many people were frustrated with her. But I also think she was doing it for the little guys who can't really fight this streaming. No one really could, but she was making a statement that I think many artists felt, where they were kind of being ripped off. If they were accustomed to getting, before iTunes Music, they were accustomed to getting way more money, but $1.29 even per song, to then be cut down to 0.0084 per stream, and yes, you have to account for how many times an individual streams, but even that, what are the odds that you as an individual stream a song enough to get to that $1.29? There might be some you do, but overall, not very many. As I mentioned before, this is a bit of a response to previous videos and content I have seen, so I'm going to mention some notes that may not specifically pertain just to this, but they coincide. I'd read that some people thought this is the market speaking and telling us what music is worth. The fact that we are not willing to pay for iTunes anymore, even though it's dying anyway, and we only want to pay for streaming subscriptions means that's what a song is valued at. I would have to disagree here. This isn't the same way as normal supply and demand, and claiming that a song is only worth 0.006 cents is kind of ridiculous. It's an oversimplification of how we got here. Since Napster changed the game and then iTunes Music pushed it further, and now here we are with streaming, the comparison that would be appropriate is if I offered you my wonderful phone for free. Say I offered it to you for free. And then I also offered it to you for $300. It'd be nice for you to pay me the $300, but if you've already been offered it for free, why are you going to pay the $300? It wouldn't make sense to. It would be ridiculous. You have to understand that no one's going to pay for stuff they don't have to pay for. Yes, you can say they're paying for the subscription, but if I don't have to individually pay for each song anymore, I'm not going to. So no, this isn't the market speaking as to what they value music at. This is the market saying, hey, if you're going to give it to me for really cheap, I'm going to take it for really cheap, like any person would. In a sense, has devalued music, but I don't equate this with being the value of music. And I think when we get more into the touring side of stuff, it'll show why the value is still there in the music industry and the actual art does have value. We've just unfortunately lost it in the actual music that's being produced for sale. I know I'm gonna have to cut it here, and I promise I have way more information to get out to you guys that is important on just this topic. I hope this was informative. I hope this gave you ideas as to why streaming is not as simple as people have made it out to be, and why it's fair that there are people really frustrated with it. I will provide more info very soon. I will get the second one done quickly so that you can get all this information around the same time. I just don't want to have these both being very long videos and you not getting through all of them. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, leave a comment, a like, join our family. It's a good time, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks, guys. If you like this video, be sure to click some of these. You'll like them. They're fun, they're different, they're something.